Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the show where we explode the many modern myths of our present culture and where we examine important issues so that we can thrive. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and on the show today we're going to look at something really important and fundamental to our freedom and our prosperity. We're going to look at the issue of rights. What are rights? Where do they come from? And why do we need them? In short, if you want to be free, if you want to live in a moral society, if you enjoy your wealth, your job, your computers, your car, the modern luxuries of life, then it's really important to recognize, firstly, that the concept of individual rights underpins and makes all of this possible. And also, it's important to know that if you don't understand rights, what they are and why we need them, then you are not going to be able to defend anyone's claim against your freedom. If we wish to live in a free society, we must be able to rationally argue for it. We must be able to demonstrate that it is necessary. And that's the purpose of this episode today. Rights are a very new concept in overall human history, and they're relatively poorly understood. Let's unpick the mess and really sort of dive into it and hopefully shed some light on it for you. Because if we don't know about rights, we are very susceptible to losing them. So what are rights? Well, rights are a moral concept, okay? And we've already looked in a previous episode at morality and the fact that morality is a code of values to guide men's choices and actions. The choices and actions that determine the course and the purpose of our lives. And we know already that we need a code of morality. Although morality is a real yawn for people, it conjures up images of going to church and being good and making sacrifices. This is not what it's about at all. We need a code of morality because human beings make mistakes. Okay, we're not born with any innate knowledge like animals that simply know what to eat. We have no innate knowledge, and we can make mistakes, and we need to suss life out. Life is a challenge. It's a problem we have to solve, our survival, and this is why we need a code of values. And incidentally, right at the top of that list of values is the practice of reasoned thinking. To think is about one of the best things you can do, because our main survival mechanism is to think, to discover facts of reality and to act appropriately on them so that we can discover how to build shelters, what to eat, how to make computers, etc. So we know that we need a morality, we need a code of moral values. So a right is a moral principle defining and sanctioning men's freedom of action within a social context. So let's just pause on that. A right is a moral principle which defines and sanctions, it sets out and also justifies, if you like, men's freedom of action in a social context. So if you're on a desert island somewhere and there's only you've been shipwrecked and you've just got to go fishing and pick fruits, the whole concept of rights would not exist. It would not pertain to that situation. Rights can only exist where men can potentially interfere with each other. Okay, and even if, for example, a wild animal would come and attack you on the desert island, this does not have any bearing on the concept of rights. It's sanctioning and protecting and setting out what men should be free to do in the context of a greater society. Okay, so that's essentially what rights are. They are to ensure that no one else hinders our freedom of action. So where do rights come from? Traditionally, rights have been ascribed to two major sources. The first one being God. They were traditionally said to be granted by God. God gives us our rights. We're God's property, and therefore nobody else should mess with us because we're God's property. The fundamental problem with this whole argument, and the reason that it doesn't give us a firm platform upon which to defend the concept of rights is that if they're bestowed to us from a supernatural deity for which there's no evidence, of course that's not a solid foundation in fact and in reality upon which to defend rights or freedom. So the whole idea that they're granted by God is A, it's not true, and B, it's not a defensible platform from which to argue. The second traditional source of rights, or alleged source of rights, has been that they come from society, or from the collective, from the tribe. And this is largely pinned to the traditional morality that we've spoken about before, which says that man has no right to live for his own sake. He's the product of the tribe. He must sacrifice for the greater good of the collective, etc., etc. So there are a number of problems with this idea that rights are a gift from society or a gift from government, you know, the society's representatives. And the first is that society or a group is an abstraction. It's a collective noun. It has no existence. It's only a word that refers to a number of individuals which do exist. So the only people that can have rights are individual men, women and children. A group per se cannot have any rights. So if something cannot have something, it cannot give it to something else, logically speaking. And also the argument that rights are bestowed on us as granted by government has a number of problems. First of all, it is men who create governments. Men come first along with their rights, and they create governments. So there's a logical problem there. Also, a government is essentially a pile of paperwork. It's a legal fiction. It's an idea. Okay, and an idea cannot bestow rights upon factual, actually existential men, women and children. Also, the idea of rights being granted by government is a sort of a confusion between laws and benefit privileges, which are granted by government. Government can grant benefit privileges. It can pass laws saying that we must do this or we mustn't do that. But these could be changed. These benefit privileges can be withdrawn. So they are not rights. They're not inherently rights. That if they could be taken away, of course, they're not rights by definition. The third source of the nature of rights is said to be that they're natural rights. And this theory holds that rights are a self-evident or a natural phenomenon, if you like. And it claims that rights are intrinsical. They are out there, self-evident. But this, again, is not a sufficient argument to support such a crucial concept with so much depending on it. Rights are not out there. Rights are a concept. They require thinking. They require lots of conceptual thinking to arrive at an understanding of the idea of rights. And they are certainly not self-evident. You can't just spot them and say, there they are in existence. They're not intrinsic to men. You can't sort of find them in any part of your body. So rights are not a natural, self-evident or intrinsical phenomena. Another problem with this explanation is that natural rights can easily morph into supernatural rights, and that again is no basis for defending a requirement for men's existence on the basis of some mystical supernatural deity. So where do they come from? Where do rights come from? Well, the thinking of Ayn Rand moved us forward enormously in our understanding of human rights and what they depend on. And I shall be borrowing heavily from her work in this explanation. So, man is a rational being. His nature requires him to use his faculty of reason to gain knowledge, to find out about his environment, and to act based upon his reasoned judgment to the furtherance of his life. Okay, this means, or rather this is his means of survival. It's the way we live, by thinking and acting on our reasoned judgment. So to live as a man, to have a fully human life, we must be free to act upon our own judgment as a necessary condition for survival of our particular mode of existence. So humans need to be able to think and act on their thinking, on their reasoned judgment. So they need to be free to do that. Rights come from the objective recognition of these facts of reality, of the nature of man. The need to be free from the interference of others is similarly a basic survival need. If you're on that desert island and you're want to build yourself a shelter or something, if there's nobody else there, obviously you're free to do whatever you like. But if somebody else arrives on your desert island and decides to beat you up or imprison you or in another way take away your freedom, you are then not free to act upon your reasoned judgments, and your capacity to live a human life is thwarted to the extent that you are interfered with by others. So this is where rights come from. If a life on earth is our purpose, it's right for men to think and to act upon their judgment. It is right to keep the products of our efforts, and it is right for men to choose and pursue their own goals. So let's look at the source of all rights. The number one right is the right to life. Now, very, very few people, virtually nobody I would hope to assume, would advocate slavery as being okay. We've abolished slavery, we've moved forward beyond that, and we all recognise that we have a right to our own life. And this is a really important fundamental starting point for the whole concept of rights. So the basic human right is the right to life, and it is from this right that basically all of the others derive. Since life is a process of self-sustaining and self-generated self-sustaining action, the right to life means the right to take the required self-generated self-sustaining action in order to live. So we kind of see implicit in that rights pertain to action. The right to life is a claim of the right to act. The right to life is inextricably linked with the right to freedom, to property, and the right to the pursuit of happiness. You can't effectively have one without having all of them. And if you compromise one, you compromise all of them. The right to freedom or liberty, to property, and the pursuit of happiness are all implied by and contained in and necessitated by the fundamental right to life. So the right to life means the right to think and act on your own judgment, which is the right to freedom. It means the right to work for your own values, to build your own shelter, etc., etc., and to keep the results or to exchange them for other values, and that's the right to property. And it also means the right to live for one's own sake, which is the right to choose and pursue our own goals, which is the right to the pursuit of happiness. So all of these are really tied together. And we can see from this that rights pertain to action, not to specific goods or services, okay? The right to life is the right to think and translate that thought into action, because that is a survival necessity. It doesn't mean we have a right to things or to services, okay? Anytime you claim the right to a home, you have to ask the question, at whose expense? Who will pay for that home? If you're claiming a right to health care or a massage every Friday afternoon, who is to perform? Who is to pay for that service? And of course, if someone needs their wealth expropriated in order to pay for it, then you're claiming the right to enslave someone else, which is a contradiction. So let's have a look at property rights, because although the right to life is the source of all rights, property rights are the only practical implementation. And without property rights, no other rights are possible. because we all have to sustain our lives by our own effort. And so if we have the right to the products of our own effort, or sorry, if we are denied the right to the results of our effort, to the product of our labour, if we're denied that, then we're denied the means to sustain our life. If one man produces and another man collects and distributes, then of course the first man is a slave. And even if you're allowed to keep a percentage, if you're working and 50% of your product of your effort is confiscated or forcefully taken from you, but you're allowed to keep half, you're still a slave. Okay, that is not freedom. So let's just underscore the fact that the right to own property does not mean the right to be given property. It is the right to act, and it is the right to the consequences of that action. It's very important to understand that rights pertain to action. The right to property is the right to use, to keep, and to dispose of the results of your efforts. It's very, very important, and to understand also that the respect for property rights is the absolute foundation of wealth creation and productivity, and it is the manifestation, ultimately, of the recognition of men's right to own their own lives. Property rights means that you don't automatically get stuff, but you do have the right to keep it if you've earned it. Rights are a concept that are steadily being eroded. Our freedoms are steadily being eroded, as many of you will be aware. And partly this is due to a sort of the introduction of all these other rights, economic rights and rights to services and goods and things, as I've already hinted at, that are not real rights. And this is diluting and destroying the actual concept of rights based on the right to life, property, and the right to the pursuit of happiness. So the destruction of rights is being brought about by all of these nonsensical rights, such as the right to a job, the right to a fair wage, the right to health care. None of these things, as I mentioned before, you cannot have the right to a good or a service. You can only have the freedom, the right to act in order to achieve these things. And there are many, the Bill of Economic Rights and all this other sort of nonsense, it only serves to destroy men's actual understanding of the basis of rights. So an example of this is taken from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26, which says, and I quote, "Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages." Close quote. But again, you need to ask the question, at whose expense? Who has the obligation to pay? And of course, in our Western society, particularly here in England, everyone just accepts that taxation is the norm. You know, the only inevitable things are death and taxation. This is not so. Taxation is a flagrant violation of property rights, the expropriation of wealth. Because if someone is claiming a right to education, so-called free education, somebody else is having their wealth expropriated. They are having their wealth confiscated in order to pay for that. So there's a contradiction there. You can't claim the right to a contradiction. You can't claim the right to enslave someone else to provide for you. You can't claim the right to be looked after, which is essentially what the welfare state is all about. So why do we need rights? Let's sort of really ram this home. If we want to own our own lives, we need rights. We need rights if we want to be free to act upon our own judgment. Not everybody wants to be free. Children don't want to be free. Adults generally do want to be free. Let's bear in mind that there are a lot of grown-up people who are not adults. When we reach the state of adulthood, generally we wish to be free to act upon our own judgment. And if we wish that, then we must understand and grasp the nature of rights and be able to defend them. If we want to live in a moral society of order and peace, we need rights. We need them to be respected and recognized. If we want to enjoy wealth and to flourish, we need rights. If we want to pursue and achieve our happiness, we need rights. If we want to keep all of our stuff and not have it confiscated by arbitrary decree of the state or any other ruler, we need rights. If we want to be protected from any arbitrary edicts of a governmental power, again, we need rights. If we want to speak our minds freely, to share ideas and to not be silenced, we need rights. If we want to come and go as we please with freedom of movement and of travel, we need rights. If we want to enjoy peace, freedom and abundance, if we want to thrive and live a fully human life, we need rights. They're really, really important. And you only have to look at the historical lessons of Soviet Russia, for example, of Nazi Germany, of the concentration camps in both of those systems. You've only got to look at the horrors of Pol Pot's Cambodia, of Chairman Mao's communist China, to see what happens and the horrors unleashed when the concept of human individual rights, I should say, is negated and rights are ignored and not recognized. This is really important. The history lessons are on the wall for us to see. Conversely, if we look at a period of time when rights were most widely accepted and on the freest country on earth, which was the birth of the United States during the Industrial Revolution, that was a period of time of the greatest freedom and the greatest flourishment, the greatest wealth production that humanity has ever seen. And that changed the life of everyone on the planet during that time, a period of the recognition of individual rights and of widespread freedom. It wasn't complete, but the degree to which freedom was recognized and property rights were recognized in the United States and in slightly lesser free nations such as the UK, the amount of wealth creation was simply enormous. This must be noted. Another point to see is that the only way to violate a man's rights is by force. Okay, there are only two ways for men to interact with other men, and this is either by rational, reasoned persuasion through argument, or by force. Those are the only two choices we have. And the only way to violate rights is through force. So really, it's just the use of reasoned argument through persuasion is the way to go. And it's the recognition of the non-aggression principle, essentially. Let's move on now to look at some common misconceptions about rights. Rights, for a start, cannot pertain to a group, as I've hinted at earlier, or to the collective. A group does not exist. It's just an abstract noun, a concept. Only individuals exist. Okay, a forest doesn't technically exist, but individual trees do. The forest is the collective noun. Okay, and society and other such collective terms, the society cannot have rights. Groups cannot have rights. You can't have a special interest group. You can't have miners' rights or workers' rights. There's only individual rights. Okay, rights are a moral concept pertaining to individuals. As we've already noted, you can't have the right to things such as food or shelter or to services, because that's claiming the right to enslave others. It's very, very important to notice this. Also, again, because rights are a moral concept and morality pertains to beings with the capacity of choice. Okay, it is only human beings that have the capacity of choice. Animals and plants exhibit behaviors. They follow instincts. They follow automatic patterns of behavior. They have no power of choice. They can't choose to kill each other. A plant can't kill another one. An animal can't commit harm and serve as its own destroyer. Only humans can do that with our power of choice, our volitional consciousness. So this is really important to notice that animals, plants, insects, even planet Earth cannot have rights. Okay? Let's acknowledge that irrational men cause all sorts of damage, nasty animal cruelty, all sorts of environmental destruction, and all sorts of bad stuff happens as a result of the irrational behavior of men. But the concept of rights is inappropriate to deal with these problems, this destruction and these things. Okay, being rational and advocating reasoned behavior is the way to prevent atrocities caused by men, not through the misplaced notion of rights. Only men, women and children, individuals, can have rights. Animals, insects, planets, plants cannot have rights. So this effectively means that the whole notion of human rights is a redundancy. In the same way that you could say individual rights is a redundancy, but unfortunately in the confusion of today, the intellectual confusion, we have to really nail down that it is individual rights we're talking about. Rights can only pertain to the individual. So let's just say also about rights that, as I've said, it's only individual men, women and children that can have them, but you can't grant them and you can't really enforce them. I guess in some respects laws can require people to recognise them, but they're not something that can be enforced. All you can really do is acknowledge them and to respect them, to recognise them and respect them. And all you have to do to accomplish this is to not deal with men by the use of force. And in any genuinely civilized society, in any free society, there would be no use of force, and all agreements between men would be rooted in rational argument and persuasion and negotiation. So lastly, let's look at why we need to know about rights. And just to knock home this point, is that we need knowledge of individual rights because they must be sometimes proactively claimed, defended, and sometimes even fought for. Okay, we have to be able to reason and explain why a free society is necessary. Why do we need a free society? Because it's man's survival means to think and act on his own judgment. We need to be free to act upon our own judgment. That's our mode of existence. That's our human survival means. Okay, so we need to understand these concepts and why we need rights, why we need property rights, etc., in order to defend it. If we can't defend it, if we have no argument for why we should be free, if we have no reason to justify our claims for freedom, then we stand liable to lose these things and wake up one day and find that we're living in tyranny. So if nobody mentions the topic, if we quietly live our lives without knowing precisely what our rights are and what they depend on, that's when they'll be lost. So it's really important that this subject be on the curriculum for life, if you like. In what passes as an education in the modern schooling, shameful lack of imparting of real meaningful knowledge, the importance of thinking, of reason, of rights as the foundation of our freedom and our civilization. So put this on your curriculum, look into rights, and there'll be a number of links in the blog post on the website, lawfulrebel.com. Check that out for a bunch of resources. Look into rights, understand them, and know why morality is essentially a science. It is provable, and we need to be free, and it can be demonstrably proved. So I do hope this post has helped. As I said, check the website out. There's loads more on there to help you thrive, to help you understand the basics of what we need to thrive and flourish, and also to get the essential information that's either misrepresented or ignored in the mainstream. Thank you very much for listening, and I do hope you'll join me again for another episode of living outside the matrix.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be